They're the words and carved images left behind by some of mankind's earliest civilizations. Together they tell a story of cities and empires whose names dot religious texts, of peoples conquered, all in an area known as the Fertile Crescent. Hello, I'm Jim Wilhelm. Since 1893, the University of Chicago has been documenting the languages and the history of the cultures of the Near East. It's a mission that received a financial boost from oil. The Institute's founder was James Henry Breasted, the first American to receive a PhD in Egyptology. His books and theories captured the imagination of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., who in 1919 agreed to fund the new Oriental Institute. Breasted coined the phrase the Fertile Crescent to describe that area that extended from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean coast. In that arc, various cultures vied for control. Religions were formed. Agriculture and metallurgy began. Today, visitors walking through the Institute's museum are taken on a journey along the crescent, beginning in Assyria, which was roughly in the area now known as Iraq. And from that area come these statues discovered in several temple sites. Dating back over 2,000 years are these figures in prayer that were purchased by individuals in that time to show their devotion when not present and to convey their prayers for them. They are also records of the clothing and the hairstyles of that time. Surrounding me is a series of relief carvings that once lined the inner courtyard of the palace of King Sargon. The palace was located in one of the largest cities in antiquity, Karsabad, which during his reign served as the Assyrian capital. The courtyard from which these panels came led to the king's throne room. Depicted in the carvings is a procession of courtiers headed by the king's son. He's followed by several men thought to be eunuchs due to their fleshy features and clean faces. Flanking the entrance were two of these colossal molossus, each one standing 16 feet tall and weighing around 40 tons. This one is so large it had to be brought into this room through an uncompleted back wall. When viewed from the front, it appears to be standing still. Yet, when viewed from the side, a fifth foot makes the beast appear to be striding forward. But this is not the most unusual aspect of this statue's pose. Almost all the lammasas that have been discovered overlook the doorway they protect. The ones in this palace have their head turned sideways to see who's approaching. It's a pose so rare that the Louvre came here to make a plaster cast of it for display in Paris. Dating back to around 721 BC, they depict both allies and the conquered bringing treasures to the king. Here several men in animal skin robes are bringing horses, a valuable commodity to an empire expanding through warfare. Those wall coverings lead visitors to the galleries that explore the cities and the people who populated the upper portion of the Fertile Crescent. It was an area dominated by the Assyrians, but who in turn were influenced by other cultures. For example, they were among the first to use iron extensively for weapons, but it was a technology they had borrowed. These metal figurines dating back to 3000 BC are the oldest known artifacts made of true bronze. They were unearthed in the Amuk Valley in what is now southeastern Turkey. There are other examples of how these cultures influenced each other in art and religion. But as impressive as these artifacts are, the Oriental Institute is world famous not for its collection, but for its linguistic skills. Most of the scribes in the Crescent region used a system of writing based on wedge-shaped characters called cuneiform. Today, the Institute has the largest number of people in the Northern Hemisphere who are able to read these symbols. Since 1921, the linguists here have compiled and published 18 volumes of the Assyrian Dictionary. They've done the same for other ancient writings as well. and even today they continue to decipher the text of other ancient cultures. Cuneiform is found on clay pegs that were inserted into walls of new buildings. Like today's cornerstones, they indicated the builder, the year, and even conveyed ownership. Some of the tablets on display contain religious materials, but most deal with business. For example, this stone has 9 columns of text on both sides recording the sale of several parcels of land. It must have been an important purchase, as it's inscribed not on clay, but in stone, an expensive yet durable material. Most records were stored in the temples to place them under the protection of the deity and to make them accessible to officials. Together they help create a picture of daily life, while others are more historical in nature. This minutely carved prism recounts 8 military campaigns that expanded the Assyrian Empire under Sargon's son's rule. One of those battles recounted is the Siege of Jerusalem, which is also mentioned in the Bible. Over the past decades, members from here have assisted in the investigation of the site of Megiddo, a town located on a highway linking Syria with Egypt. Located on the Mediterranean coast, the town was a port not only for foreign products, but for new ideas as well. It was the principal city of southern Levant, an area deemed holy by Islam, and where both Judaism and Christianity were born. From the time of the Canaanites is this gold-covered bronze statue of El, the father of their gods. Next to it is a smaller figure that depicts El's son, Baal. Both sculptures date back to around 1300 BC. One common element that archaeologists found throughout the various strata was altars. These small ones were probably used in the home for burning oil or grains or fruits so that the aroma would ascend to the deity. Eventually, the Israelites would become the dominant culture of the area. On display is a fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It comes from a non-biblical Hebrew text which praises the virtues of the Torah, study, and humility. One of the most spectacular finds at Megiddo was discovered in what had been the cellar of an Egyptian palace. There, archaeologists uncovered over 300 pieces of ivory carved in various artistic styles. For example, this griffin emulates the Mycenaean Greek style more than the Egyptian style. Ivory was used in a variety of ways, for special containers, furniture inlays, and even for game boards. This one had gold accents. Much of the gold and ivory that contributed to Egypt's wealth came from an area known as Nubia. Today, the temples and the tombs from that culture lay under a 300-mile lake created by a dam on the Nile River. Beginning in 1905, the Institute sponsored several investigations into that area. What they were able to uncover will soon be a part of a new exhibit of which we were able to get a sneak peek.
The word Nubia itself, we think, comes from the Egyptian word for gold, and with that ending, IA on the end. This is a Greek term in origin, meaning the land of gold. And so Nubia was very, very rich in natural resources, particularly gold. Also was an active trading partner with Egypt, bringing products from sub-Saharan Africa, southern Africa. Nubia is one of the earliest complex societies in Africa. It developed roughly the same time as the Egyptian pharaohs were coming to power, but it's much less well known in the United States and throughout the world than the Egyptian civilization. And so in this exhibit, we're going to be able to trace the history of the Nubians from the time that they first developed sort of symbols of royal power, and through a time when the Egyptians came down, conquered Nubia, established a series of forts along the Nile River, and then at a later period of history, the Nubians rose up and reconquered Egypt themselves, and under a series of kings called Kushite kings, ruled much of that area for hundreds of years. So in addition to this historical picture, Nubia has a very distinctive aesthetic to it throughout its millennia of history. And we're going to begin with some ceramics that I think really evoke this, what really is a kind of an African aesthetic. So it's very, very different ceramic tradition from the Egyptian ceramic tradition, which was wheel-made, largely mass-produced. The Nubian ceramic tradition is handmade, and its forms are based on baskets and gourds. So we have two examples here. One of them is from the very earliest period that will be on display. This is the period when Nubia first became a powerful civilization, around 3000 BC. This second pot that we have comes from a much later period, from this Kushite period that I was referring to, or Meroitic as it's sometimes known. And this is a wheel-made pot, so they've adopted that technology from the Egyptians. But they've developed a very, very distinctive painted decoration. These are objects that came from tombs, dating to about 300 AD, and they are a pair of sandals and a quiver. The Egyptians referred to Nubia as the land of the bow, and this is because Nubian archers were renowned for their skill. They were served as mercenaries in the Egyptian army. This is a figure of a Nubian. It has black skin, particular kind of hairstyle that's distinctive of people who lived along this part of the Nile. And yet, it's not an indigenous Nubian representation. This came from an Egyptian temple at Medinet Habu. This was part of a series of statues of the enemies of Egypt, all represented with their arms bound behind their backs. They're lying on their stomachs underneath something called the window of appearances, where the pharaoh would appear to be standing on the backs of these enemies. So that is to say that although this looks at first glance like something that we would expect to be a Nubian, in fact, this is a stereotyped representation by a colonial occupier of a subject people. What we'd like people to take away from this exhibit is that Nubia was a powerful and important civilization that had significant political impacts on the history of the ancient Near East, as well as having a role within the history of African civilizations.
Greeting visitors in the Egyptian gallery is this statue, discovered in the 1930s. It still has its original coloring, and it's believed to have been commissioned during the reign of King Tut. But his time on the throne was short, and it's thought the statue was not finished at the time of Tut's death. On the back, the inscription had been changed to the name of his successor, who also had a short term, so the name was changed again. What's interesting about the Egyptian art of that era is that it was not seen as a factual portrait, but as a symbol of the king. Identity was established by whose name was inscribed on the statue. Also on display are smaller figurines recovered from various royal tombs depicting activities in everyday life. And there are examples of writings from this time that also give an insight to life in ancient Egypt. This long piece deals with the sale of 1/16 of the house. Apparently the home had several owners. It's also an indication of the complexity of their legal system. Another letter demonstrates how much workers from that era had in common with today's laborers. This document, written by a scribe, lists the grievance of the workers who were constructing the tombs for the sons of Ramses III. Chief among this complaint is the lack of supplies and pay. The events in this letter eventually led to the workers laying down their tools in a temple and walking off the job. It's believed that this is the first labor strike in recorded history, and it was a success. The final gallery we'll explore exhibits artifacts recovered from Persia, including those from the city of Persepolis. It had been a royal administration center until around 330 BC, when it was sacked by Alexander the Great. Persia had been a giant empire, and its kings were the undisputed rulers of the known civilized world for 2 centuries. In the ruins of one building, archaeologists found these double face figures that top columns and were designed to support the roof beams. Also amongst the debris were discovered these gold pieces, a reminder of the wealth of the Persian people. Today, the Institute continues to expand our understanding of those ancient cultures through linguistic interpretation and digs. And while recovered artifacts must now remain in the country where they're discovered, the museum is not static. Only about 1/10 of the collection is on display, so over the years exhibits may be changed. Plus, we're told there's still unopened crates from the 1920s and 30s waiting to be explored. For directions or more information about the Oriental Institute Museum, call 773-702-9520 or log on to their website at www.oi.uchicago.edu.